What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome? Well, I have a very interesting guy here today, and I want to give a shout out to Sabrina Morgan because she actually connected me to Danny and his story. And you guys might have seen Danny because if you have TikTok, this guy is just wrapping it up on TikTok. He's got over 142,000 followers. And I started following him, and I am always wondering, hey, what's Danny going to say today? I mean, he's very thought-provoking. He's a smart guy. He talks about all kinds of different things, but I love his posts, and I think that's why he's got so many followers. But Danny's story is, I mean, he went from the Atlanta Braves to prison, and that sounds fascinating, but his whole story is fascinating. That's just a piece of his story. But he's out now, and he's doing great work with his Second Chance. He's working at a place. I love this idea. It's called Containing Luxury, and it's making tiny homes out of shipping containers, which makes all kinds of sense because there's no inventory on the market. People need homes. These are affordable homes. They look really cool. And, Danny's gone, a step further. He's working with nonprofits with this venture, and it's really helping people who are justice impacted, and love everything about it. Can't wait to jump in and unpack all this with Danny. But first, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple weekends walking car lots, looking for a car? Then you spend like 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. I'm not talking bad about dentists here. Eddie Logan, if you need a good dentist, he's a good friend of mine. Check him out over in O'Fallon. Well, there's a better way. Take away all the pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. And they also offer you warranties and financing. It's full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them that Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. All right, Danny Collins. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Danny and I had quite it was some work to get on here today. I think it was on my side. But we finally got our internet connected, and I think we've got good internet, which is good. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm not echoing inside of a container.
Yes, and exactly. And I love that. I love that whole concept with the containers because I think, Danny, I was watching something on the news that we send all these containers come over from China and India and whatever, and then they really don't go back. So we've just got piles and piles and piles of inventory of containers, and there's nothing being done with them. And you guys are taking these things and actually making some. And I checked out the what these containers look like on the inside. These are actually really nice containers. I mean, nice homes.
You build them out nice. The whole concept is to have something that is, that is somewhat luxurious, but also affordable. So it's like, I tell people it's like the intersection of luxury and affordability.
Yeah. It's like a really nice, what am I wanting to say? A Winnebago, it's like one of the touring buses.
Yeah. So, and that was kind of like our mindset was to be a direct replacement for either RVs or
that's what I was looking for.
RVs. Trailers, because most of the time those things fall apart. It doesn't take long before you start having issues with them. Whereas their containers are like tanks,
They're like tanks.
I know some people, they're thinking metal box, but when you see the inside of them, they're nice.
Yeah, they are really nice. You guys got to
Yeah.
check it out. I think you can go to the website. That's it's called Containing Luxury, right?
Yep. Containingluxury.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Danny, I was just telling you, I watched a really interesting, fascinating interview with you with Ian Beck. It's called Locked In, and I want to go back to your growing up story because you have, like, we were just talking about this before we got on, one of the more interesting stories as a kid that I don't think I've ever really heard of anything like what you explained, what happened in the driveway. But can you go back and just kind of let us into Danny Collins growing up? What was your world like? And please don't leave out the story about the driveway story.
Gotcha. So I was raised in Fort Pierce, Florida, with my dad and my stepmom, but I was raised to believe that my stepmom was my biological mother. I didn't know any different. And when I was, I would say 5 or 6, I don't know how old I was playing basketball in front of my house, and these two girls come riding by on a bike. One girl to the other girl and says, "Daniel, that's your sister Rebecca," and they keep on riding. So I didn't know how to process that. I was young, didn't really think a whole lot of it, but I ran inside and, continued on with my life. And my house, there wasn't a whole lot of communication. There wasn't a whole lot of affection. There wasn't any of that. My parents never said, "I love you." It was just, there wasn't emotion, anything. And so not too long after that, comes up to me and says, "Daniel, you don't know me. My name's Rebecca and I'm your sister." And we were at school and I ended up running completely the opposite direction. And I was young. And so if I was able to process this stuff at a young age, I probably would have realized that obviously, they live close to me,
Yeah, real close and biking distance.
Bicycle, yeah. So when I first found out that my mom, the lady I was calling my mom, wasn't my mom, was when I was 9. I had to take a birth certificate to the Little League fields to verify my age. And so my dad gave me the birth certificate to give to the coach. And when I looked at the name, I saw that the name of the lady I was calling my mom wasn't the name that was on the birth certificate. So, and,
Danny, did you, I'm curious, like when that happened, I mean, can't imagine what was going through your mind. Cause I mean, all this time you think this is your mom. I mean, I can't, I don't even know how you process that as a kid, but did you go talk to your dad and say, "Hey, Dad, what do we do? Like, what's going on here? Where's my mom?"
No. So there wasn't communication really, but I started acting out. So I started getting in trouble is one thing. I went to my Little League coach and told my Little League coach that one day I'm going to grow up and play professional baseball for the Braves, specifically said for the Braves. So maybe my mom would want me. And that was kind of the mindset behind that. But like, I never, ever said anything to my parents, but I did start acting out. And
I mean, why do you think you didn't, Danny? I mean, that seems like, because it seems like to me that if you found out that you weren't the son of this lady that you thought that was your mom, and your dad, you have to assume knows the whole story. Was there a reason why were you intimidated to talk to him about it, or was it just something you just couldn't get through your head?
I didn't go to my parents for, to talk about things. There wasn't, my family was very disciplined, had to make straight A's, a lot of rules, like, and yes, I think there was a little bit of fear with my parents. Like I feared them more than I did, because like I said, there wasn't the affection either. Like my family was very, strict, and there wasn't the "I love you." So to me, like the whole idea of this concept of love or what that is was like, if I behave a certain way, if I perform well, then, the adoration's there, like it was, but there was this expectation that like, I always had to be perfect. And so I never opened up to them ever. But I did lash out at them. So like there was a time, I think it was about the last time I used to get spanked with the belt. Like
Yeah.
it was that time area. And there was a time where I was being disciplined and I told my mom, I was like, you can't punish me. You're not my real mom. And she started crying and I kicked her in the shin and I ran. And my dad chased me down. I ended up throwing a sandwich at him that I had in my hand. And, of course, I got my butt beat. And, but we didn't talk about it. So then there was another time, though, and this was the wildest story. So I was dating this girl, and my biological mother's maiden name was Fields. And I was dating this girl, but I still didn't even process this. And I was about 16 or 17 at this time. And this is really where we first acknowledged it, is that I was dating this girl. Her name was Crystal, and her last name was Fields, but I didn't put it together. And come to find out, I was related to her in some way. But when I started dating her, my parents were so strict that I had to write down the name of the house, the family of where I was going, the dad's name, phone number, and address,
Wow.
before I could go over there. When I wrote the name down, my dad looked at the name on the paper and was like, is her dad a cop? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you're not going over there. And I was like, what do you mean I'm not going over there? He said, it has to do with your biological mother.
And you can, and at this time, Danny, you and your dad haven't even really talked about this, right?
Never talked about it. I mean, there was times where I think he maybe tried to like talk to me, but like I threw like I wouldn't, like there was just,
I just can't imagine. I mean, I know all the rest of your story that went on in your life, but this had to be a big deal.
It was a huge deal for me. I had so much resentment, and I had a lot of resentment towards, my stepmom. I never gave her a chance, even though she was the mom in my life. She was, there since I was like 1.
Yeah.
So that's how young I was when my biological mother left. So like, I don't remember her at all. Obviously I couldn't tell you, she ended up passing, but I couldn't tell you what she looked like or anything. But I ended up going over to that house anyways when I went.
Of course you did.
I wasn't over there. And I told her the story of like what happened. And so she went and told her dad, because that's whose name I wrote on the paper.
Yeah.
And then her dad told her that my mom was like his cousin or something. So this girl ended up being like my second or third cousin. So like, thank God, like I didn't sleep with her at this point. I was young, but I still like, it was like, how do you handle that? And I still didn't know how to process that. She started crying. I ended up leaving the house, but still never talked about it with my family. And
so do you think, considering all that stuff that's going on in your head, I mean, that's some wild shit. Do you think that the whole sport thing, the baseball and basketball thing, was that an escape for you to get away from that in your mind?
I think baseball was just something that I was super passionate about since I was a kid. And, again, my parents I couldn't play other sports. I had to pick one sport, like baseball, kind of the sport that I chose. And, baseball was definitely like my escape. It was where and it's also where like I received validation and like affection and, like, because I did well at it. And that's where like I felt like that I was getting, the attention, because like I said, my parents were super strict and they worked all the time. Like, I used to have a lot of resentment and blame them for like my issues, but I also understand that like, being a parent doesn't come with the owner's manual. And
true. You don't pick your parents.
And I recognize that now that I'm older and I've gotten wiser, but I never learned how to process emotions. Like, and yeah. So ultimately, I think I always say the gateway to addiction, the gateway drug is not marijuana or alcohol, but it's childhood trauma, and that's what always leads to addiction. Yeah. And it's unresolved childhood trauma. I didn't know how to. The one time I went to therapy with my dad, and this was after all that, I must have been, I don't know, in my 18, 19, like right around that time, maybe my senior year in high school. I can't even remember when it was, but the conversation of my biological mother was brought up, and my dad started like bawling, crying, and I had never seen him cry before. So that, like, after that meeting, I just never went back. after that session with that therapist, because it was just too much for me. Because I would run away from anything that involved emotions, and involved, talking about feelings or talking about, like, I would freeze up. And I think that's what ultimately led me down the path that I ended up going on.
Yeah, because it's I want to talk about this because it's so interesting, because I know at some point you realize, hey, I'm pretty good at baseball. And, but I still don't think, in listening to your story, I don't think you believed it, even though everybody around you was starting to say, that this is a 6'3" guy that can throw the ball and he's left-handed. And, but
go ahead.
But at the other side of things, I think you also had all these things you were dealing with, which what you're talking about led into kind of the wild side of maybe your escape through drugs and alcohol and that, so that you maybe were doing both things, both baseball and drugs and alcohol were almost like an escape from your world that you didn't want to tackle, really. It was kind of deep and dark and all those things that.
Well, that was a big fight in my household too, though, is how I was raised. So, and that was always a fight between my parents, was how I would be disciplined. And I mean, they would get literally like in almost fist fights with each other. Like, and it was always about, my dad was my biggest enabler. And, he wanted me to, as long as I played baseball and I did well and I made straight A's, that he would pay my insurance, that he would, give me gas and a car.
You earned it.
And I didn't have to work. Whereas my mom was like, my dad used to tell my mom, like, this is going to pay off. It's going to pay for his college. He may play professionally. And my mom was like, you're living in La La Land. This is, 1 in a million, make it.
Right.
He needs to get a job and learn responsibility. And I think there was some truth to both of them,
Yeah.
But it was, as a kid, like, I used to watch them literally fight with each other. And it was always about me. So that's the thing. And I had a sister too in the house that was with my dad and my stepmom. And I can imagine how hard it was for her too, to see this all the time, because like, it was always a fight between mom and dad about me. And it was just about how to parent me. And especially because I was a straight A student, but I also got a lot of trouble. I mean, from elementary all the way up, I was always, just into something. And so, yeah, that was hard. And I didn't really turn into alcohol. I turned into alcohol, drugs, probably a little bit my senior year. And then, my freshman and sophomore year of college. But like, I didn't really have the means, because we weren't rich by any means. So like, I think it wasn't until like I signed and I got the big contract is when I really, dove headfirst into alcohol and drugs.
Let's talk about that, because I think you were a sophomore in college, and I think the story is really fascinating because you didn't think you were getting drafted, and one of the guys that he was pretty sure he was getting drafted contacted you. You didn't even believe him.
Yeah, I had no idea. So I got drafted my freshman year in college. And back then in baseball, they had 50 rounds. So if you were drafted anything after really probably the 10th round or especially the 20th round, you weren't getting anything. Like, it was maybe $1,000 signing bonus. And, but yeah, I wasn't expected to get drafted. I probably had the worst season of my life in baseball after my freshman year. I went like 1-4 with a 4.5 ERA. I was partying in college, like had no expectation. And in fact, when he called me, I was partying at the time and he had watched it he was watching the draft on the computer. So like, the first couple of days it's on TV and then when he plays, it pops up on the computer. So he called me and he was like, hey, congratulations, man. You just got drafted by the Braves. And I was like, yeah, right. Like, get out of here. He's like, I'm being for real. Like I ended up hanging the phone up on him. And he said, no, I'm being for real. Well, then the next day I got a phone call from a guy by the name of Marco Patti. He said, Mr. Collins, congratulations. This is Marco Patti with the Atlanta Braves, and we selected you in the 45th round of this year's amateur draft. And he goes, now our expectation is not to sign you this year, but we want to do what's called a draft and follow. And that was real big back then, is that if you sign your rights to that team, then they come back out and scout you the next year in college. And the way baseball works is if you go to a junior college, you're draft eligible every year. But if you go to a 4-year school, you're not draft eligible until after you're junior.
And I didn't know that until I was listening to your other interview. I didn't actually realize that. I thought that the 4-year college guys could get drafted at any time. So that was news to me.
Yeah, no, not until they complete their junior year. Whereas like basketball, you could be one and done.
Right.
You could do your freshman year and go right into the draft. Baseball, the rules were different. But I didn't have a whole lot of 4-year school offers anyways coming out of high school. My high school wasn't great. I did fairly well, with the team that we had, but and I did really well in our summer ball. Like we ended up winning state championship. Like that's really what started to get me on the radar was after that. And that's when I got the offer to like our local junior college. So then what was so bad is even after my freshman year in college, like I didn't get offered to come back with a scholarship. I had to start looking for other schools. Like that's how bad of a season I had.
Wow.
But I think after I got drafted, of course they're going to ask you to come back because that's going to guarantee scouts to be out there.
Sure.
And we had a guy that ended up signing with the Twins or something, a pitcher. So like they were like, the scholarship opened up, you can stay in the dorm.
Yeah.
And I ended up going back my sophomore year. In my sophomore year, I had probably the best season of my life outside of maybe my, summer ball when we won the state championship. But like my sophomore year in college, I finished like 10-2 or something. I threw the only no-hitter in school history, and I happened to throw it in front of a guy by the name of Dayton Moore, who ended up being the general manager for the Kansas City Royals when they won the World Series. But Dayton was the head of minor league operations for the Braves at the time. So he was there, plus the Braves national scouting director. And I threw it down in Miami against Miami-Dade, which was a school known, for being able to hit the ball well.
Yeah, good timing.
Timing was just everything. And I ended up having an agent that told me that he felt like I could sign anywhere from, 500 to 750,000, and he wanted me to hold out. And but I ended up signing for a lot less because, again, the way that whole thing works is that you can't technically sign an agent. Like you hire it, then you lose your amateur.
What are you thinking at the time? I mean, you're all of a sudden in this new world situation. And I'm not sure what's going on with you on your personal side because you've actually got some money, and this is a whole thing that you've thought about since you were a kid and said, I'm going to go to the Atlanta Braves and make my mom love me. So what's going on in your mind through all this?
What was going on in my life? You know what I mean? Like, I wish I was like really aware of like how big this was, because I minimized everything. I just kind of went with the, this is going to happen. This is going to last forever. I'm going to be a multimillionaire and play professional baseball.
Right.
But not really consciously thinking about the decisions I'm making and how they're going to impact my future, And even when I signed with my agent, he flew me up to New York, and we went to the Yankees Twins series. This was like in 2003. And I ended up meeting like Peyton Manning, Marcus Allen, Jeremy Shockey, David Wells. It was like an eclectic group of people together, and we were at Tao Manhattan.
That sounds very cool.
I remember thinking to myself, and I was in an elevator with George Steinbrenner. I remember thinking to myself, like I had arrived, like this is it, like I'm here.
Yeah.
And but really I had so much more work to do because I was just in rookie ball of the minor leagues. And at that level, everybody can play, and it's a matter of what you're doing off the field to prepare yourself for your future. And I was hanging out with drug dealers back home, like I would go to spring training and literally drive back because our spring training was in Orlando. And I would drive back to my hometown of Fort Pierce, which was 2 hours away, at midnight, to go get some Coke and hang out and party, and then drive all the way back and have to be at the field at 7:00 in the morning. The next day. There was even a time where I was so bad that I ended up passing out on the field, in spring training. I was so malnourished. I was like 155 pounds.
Wow.
6'3". I couldn't even get the ball to home plate. Like this is how, like I had to like get it back together real quick because I didn't work out in the off season. Like I was caught up in the wrong crowd when I went back home,
and you had money too.
And it just happened. Like I said, it happened so fast,
And you had money too, Danny, at that time. I mean, it was like you could
for 19, I think the very first check I got was just one check for like 62,000. Then I got another check for 62,000. Plus I had another 40,000 for school. So like, I mean, for me growing up poor and, living paycheck to paycheck with my parents to now having, a good, decent check, chunk of cash, like it was to me like, and with the thought that like now I'm going to make a whole bunch more, like, and that was always like, the carrot on the stick is that, it's just the beginning.
Well, when you passed out on the field and you're malnourished, I mean, are you thinking, shit, I've really messed this up? Or are you thinking, well, they're going to give me a second chance. I'll be able to work this out.
I'm not even thinking about any of that. They don't even know what is going on with me. And that's the problem. I was so wrapped up in addiction at the time that I didn't even know it. And even if you tried to tell me, I wouldn't listen. Like you couldn't tell me nothing. Like I thought that I had it going on. Like I was partying. I remember going out with the guys and stuff. And I came back and you had people like Jeff Francoeur and Brian McCann. And these are, big league prospects. And they're kind of looking at me like, this guy is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had different like girls coming back to the hotel. Like it was just, I was caught up in the lifestyle of being rich and famous, but I'm nowhere near that because I'm delusional.
But you're living the lifestyle.
I'm living the lifestyle and thinking that, this is it. But I was so when they finally released me, because at first they didn't, they suspended me indefinitely. And I just kept getting in trouble. They finally said, you can't go out. Like if you get caught up in anything else, like this is it.
Yeah.
And I ended up going out where other people got in trouble, got in a fight. And I happened to be there. And once my name got back to it, they ended up suspending me. But there was even a time where they had to come, we're in the hotel in spring training and they had to come cut the chain on my door. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't go to the field because I was so like, hungover and messed up from weeks of partying, and Braves officials like came and cut the chain on my door and to get in to like be like, what's going on, like what are you doing? And like I was just way out of control
at that point. Danny, are you thinking, holy shit, what? Or is it just you're in such a spiral that it's just like it's a blur?
Yeah. And most people, when they're in that spiral, like they don't see it. They, obviously, if they did, they would, if they had the ability to consciously sit down and think about what their life, what they're doing with their life. Like, and that's the reality of addiction. Like addiction will grab a hold of you and it will completely destroy you, your life. And I say it all the time, addiction is the only disease powerful enough to affect people that don't even have it. Because it was making like my family sick. It was making the people around me sick. Like, because of course they're trying to help me, they're trying to talk sense into me, but I'm just thinking like, I'm playing professional baseball. This is, I was arrogant, but I was at the same time really insecure. And again, it was just, I didn't know how to process emotions. I didn't know how to process feelings. And the one thing that always worked for me was the alcohol or the drugs.
So like, what happens to you when they cut that chain and you go back? What do you do?
They ended up suspending me indefinitely. So when I went back home, I went right back to the same drug dealer friends. I was living in a house with 3 different drug dealers. It was basically a trap house. And, we had at any given time, there could probably be a quarter key of coke in there, guns everywhere. Like it was just, that's the lifestyle that I thought that, I'm going to live. And it was just insanity, really. And, when they suspended me indefinitely, my agent's trying to get me to get it back together. He's telling me to go work out. I'm skipping workouts. And after a few months, I started working with my dad a little bit, and, he's trying to talk to me. And after a few months, the Braves called me up to let me know that they were releasing me. And by then I was just too far gone. Within the next few months, I'm homeless, like in the streets, spent all the money. Like that's how fast the spiral was. And it was just bam, 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 bam. And before you know it, it's over with.
How long were you homeless?
Probably a few years technically. I
Wow.
mean, couch surfing, living
Yeah.
with other people, living with a girlfriend, I mean, it got so bad that I even took the money that the Braves gave me to go back to school. I went to the University of South Florida, spent all the money there. Got so bad that I started to sell the furniture in a furnished apartment that I was renting. That I called my dad, or I actually emailed him and told him, like, if you just bail me out this, one last time, I'll get it together. And I wrote him this super long email, and then, he wrote me back, and I got it tattooed on the side of me now, but he said, son, words are easy to say. Actions govern our lives. Life is a short trip to a small planet. Life everlasting is your choice. And that always stuck with me, because I wrote him like this 4-page email of how, if you just, I'm going to get it together. And my dad was a man of few words. He didn't communicate much, but he was always there. My dad's the one that raised me. When my biological mother left, he dropped out of law school to raise me.
Yeah.
And he worked at a grocery store, for years before he started working for Kraft Foods and corporate America. But he was always, the person that I could call on, that was there. If I was in trouble, he's coming to pick me up. There was times where, like, I was homeless in different cities. Like, I'd be in, a trap house in Jacksonville, on the east side of Jacksonville, in Springfield. And, I'd call my dad, and he'd come pay like my dope bill and pick me up from the house. And so many times, like, I put them through so much, emotional pain and just financial strain. And it was just because I spent all my money, then I'm starting to get in trouble, like minor arrests. It started, but it progressively got worse. And that was the other thing too, is that early on when I was getting arrested, they thought that they were protecting me. So they'd slap me on the wrist. And this is before the age of social media. Because now the stuff that I did, like, immediately they would have released me, like immediate, because it would have just been too much negative attention. But the amount of privilege that I had in that, and that's something else that I look at, is that because of my status as a professional baseball player, I got arrested for possession of cocaine. They slapped me on my wrist and let me go, because they always thought that he's going to get back to his career. He's going to get back to his career. Yeah. And it just never happened, because I didn't get the help that I needed.
Yeah.
And before you know it is when I'm looking at prison. I get in a high-speed chase. And
well, we've got to talk about this high-speed chase, because it's like, some of this stuff, Danny, that you talk about, you see in movies. And this high-speed chase thing, first of all, you're lucky you're alive. I mean, I can't really believe that this all happened and you survived. But walk the listeners through what happened that day and what was how it happened.
So obviously I was homeless at this time. Basically, I was living out of my truck. I was working for a company out of Jacksonville. I was doing marketing. I was in their work truck.
Their truck.
Living out of it. Yeah. And the girlfriend that I was with is the person that I'm married to now, and we're actually separated. But she had kicked me out, like, because I was actively using. You can't come back here. So I'm living out of this truck, and I'm kind of in and out living with my friend back home. But my friend's also on the side, hustling drugs, and I'm getting, drugs from him. And finally he's like cutting me off, and he's like, dude, you got to get it together. And I get mad. I got a bunch of stuff over at his house. He's not there. I go to the house. It's late. I knock on the door. His girlfriend's sister answers the door, and I'm like, hey, can I come in and get some of my stuff? I got it here. And she's like, yeah, so I go in there, I grab my stuff, I go into his safe, I grab some stuff out of his safe, I tuck it in my shoe, I grab some jewelry and other stuff, and then I end up leaving. Well, when I leave, I'm like, dang, I should have grabbed everything. I still had a bunch of my stuff there, my clothes, everything. So now when I go back, I knock on the door again. She opens up the door, but she's on the phone, and she has a look on her face like, now she knows that, like, I'm not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So I take it upon myself to walk in the door. She doesn't say anything to me, but you can tell she's on the phone with probably him. Mm-hmm. I grab more stuff, my stuff. I go to leave. Now here he comes around the corner. I hurry up and get in the truck, and I take off. But his girlfriend, calls the cops. As I'm leaving, I'm going to go back down south where my girlfriend's living at the time, even though she doesn't want me there. But like now
Yeah.
I'm in
You're spinning.
addition, I'm not
Yeah.
thinking clearly. Yeah. There's no clarity. I'm not making sound decisions. Uh, as I'm going to make a turn to go onto the road to go to 95, I-95, there's a cop coming and we're the only two people on the road. And I'm going to turn right and I see he's got his left turn signal on. So I say, you know what? I'm just going to keep going straight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I go straight, I look in my rearview mirror, I see he stops in the road. And now I know he's turning around. So before he can even turn around, I start taking off because I know he's coming for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I take off, next thing you know, here he comes behind me with the sirens. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm not stopping. You know, they're going to have to kill me. Like, this is it. Like, my life was in such disarray. It was so dysfunctional.
Yeah, and you didn't care about living at that time. I remember this information looking at your stuff, and then you were like, I don't. In fact, you took some opportunities and didn't get through it, but you were in that mindset. You didn't care.
Yeah. The house could have hurt somebody else. Thank God it didn't. And you know, obviously, I'm still here, but I'm hauling butt down this road. Obviously, the cops coming behind me fast. I start turning off on a bunch of back roads, and I turn the headlights off. But every time I'm hitting the brakes, the cops on me again. So I end up coming to a dead end road. Cops behind me, get out of the car like with their guns drawn, and I'm looking, and I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm not stopping. Like, they're gonna have to kill me. So I dropped the truck into it's a little 4-banger, 5-speed Nissan Frontier company truck that I'm in. And I put it in first gear. I whip it around, and now I'm facing in the direction of the cops. And, by the grace of God, I didn't hit any of them. I managed to get through without hitting them, and they didn't shoot me. And I kept driving. But now I'm like, I got to figure out a way to brake lights off because every time I hit the brakes, they're on me. So I get this bright idea that I'm going to start pulling fuses. So I'm reaching down for the fuse box. Cops are chasing me. I look up and the road ends. There's like a mound of dirt with signs in it, that are pointing, you got to go left or right.
Yeah,
like,
cannot straight.
And I went straight. And I went up. I caught air. I tried to turn the wheel last minute. So when I landed, the truck was facing back towards the canal, but I hit the water. So I hit the water. My head hits the windshield. I start panicking. There's a bunch of water coming in the truck. I'm freaking out. Now, all of a sudden, these thoughts of suicide and not wanting to live, self-preservation kicks in. Like, now I'm doing whatever I can to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I start swallowing a bunch of water because I'm panicking. But I can't get the doors open. I can't get the windows open. Truck starts sinking. And there's a hatch in this truck, and there's a camper on the back. So I don't know if I punched the glass or if I just went through, if it broke on impact. But I have a scar right there.
Oh God, that's a huge scar. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge scar, and it right on my hand. I ended up going through like this hatch, and I feel like somebody like pulls me through. But I go to swim up. Like in my mind, I'm just trying to get air.
Mm-hmm.
And I go to swim up. My head hits the camper because there's so much water. So like I'm trying to get up. I'm just being rushed with water. My head hits the camper and I'm like, shoot, like I can't get out of here. And when a vehicle, it's like it doesn't go complete. Like it started like level out a little bit, like, as the water's filling. But there's still a back corner pocket of air in the back of this truck. And I go get that pocket of air. And finally, like the corner pops open. And as the truck is going completely under, I'm coming out at the same time. So it was like a vacuum. It was like a black hole. Like it pulled me, like it was pulling me under as I'm trying to get out. But I feel somebody like pull me up. And so I finally get up to the air. In my mind, I'm still running, but I'm, out of breath. I'm panicking. And the vehicle goes completely under. I look on one side of the road. I look on the other side of the road. I see cop lights. I'm still running. I see a Q-beam shine in the water. So after I started trying to swim, this canal is called Taylor Creek Canal in Fort Pierce. It's a strong canal. It goes out to the river. It runs all the way from Lake Okeechobee out to the Kissimmee River, all the way out to the river. Mm-hmm. And strong current. So I realized I can't swim in this current. I'm done. So I was like, you know what? I give up. I surrender. I swim to this Q-beam shine in the water. I get to the land, and it's a steep climb. It's like a steep canal bank. It's filled with high grass, and I end up getting up on the canal bank, and I black out. I completely pass out. And when I wake up, it's the next day, and I'm laying there on the side of the canal bank. I'm covered in blood. All I got on is a t-shirt and boxer briefs. The current was so strong, it ripped my shorts off. It ripped my shoes off. I had a pair of Chuck Taylors, ripped my shoes off. My whole leg sliced open. The bottom of my foot sliced open. And I start screaming, you know.
You're lucky you didn't bleed to death.
Yeah. What's that?
I said, you're lucky you didn't bleed to death.
Yeah, and I don't know how much time went by, or gators. You know, this is Florida, that canal, and that I didn't drown. But
all those things.
When I wake up and I'm covered in blood, I start screaming. Next thing you know, a cop and an ambulance comes up, and I don't know how much time went by, but they get out of their vehicles and they're looking in the water. They're not even looking over at me. Then they hear me scream. They start coming over. Well, first thing I do is start cussing them out. Like, you MFers pulled me out of this truck. You left me here for dead. I need to get to the hospital. And they were like, we didn't pull you out of that vehicle, you know? And I was like, if you didn't pull me out of the vehicle, how did I get here? And what brought you back to this spot? And they said, you know, we thought you pulled a Houdini and disappeared. There was a lady on the corner of the street. I guess she heard somebody screaming, you know, bloody murder for their life, and that there was a white male out here covered in blood, and that's what brought them back. I guess they got the call, and they came back to that spot, and they kept asking me who was driving. Like, that's all they were concerned with, and me being green to the system at the time, because technically that truck's in the vehicle. I'm on the side of the canal bank. Anybody could have been driving.
Exactly.
You know,
right.
Another driver that got away, but all I kept saying is, I was driving. Who the hell else do you think was driving? Because in my mind, they pulled me out of this vehicle and they left me there. Like, I don't know what I was thinking at the time, but so they ended up taking me to the hospital. My dad goes up there, you know, he's there for a little while. Then my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now that I'm separated from, she was getting ready to come up there. And as she's getting ready to come up there, they finally put me under arrest, and they handcuffed me to the bed. And I ended up getting 52.6 months in prison, followed by a year house arrest from that.
And what did they charge you with, Danny? What was all the
2 burglary of occupied dwellings for my friend's house where my stuff was. And he even dropped the charges, you know. He didn't want to press charges. My dad gave him some money for restitution, and he dropped the charges. I was charged with 2 burglary of occupied dwellings, 2 grand thefts, I think a burglary of conveyance for going in the vehicle, his vehicle in the driveway, aggravated fleeing and eluding. They initially charged me with aggravating assault on an officer because they said that when my vehicle was pointed in his direction, he was in fear of his life.
Yeah.
And thank God, because it becomes a deadly missile.
Sure.
And I could only imagine, like, thank God I didn't hit him.
Right.
And, you know, because that would have been the end of my life. And the end of his, obviously, the danger that, you know, when you're in active addiction, making these poor decisions that, you know, putting other people's lives in danger. And so they ended up dropping that down to a misdemeanor. And I had a possession of cocaine that I was already out on bond for.
Okay.
So I ended up having like 9 felonies on that
day.
Case.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they ended up putting all the cases together.
And I know, Danny, you had kind of gone in and out of things with being arrested, but this was like your first real time in prison. What was that like for you to go in that world knowing that you're going to be there for a while?
I mean, obviously it was super fearful at first. I did almost a year and a half in the county. They were offering me 20 years. I finally pled out in front of a judge with a 10-year cap, and he gave me what I scored out to on my points, which was 52.6 months, followed by a year house arrest. When I went to prison, I had about 2 years left of time to do. They immediately sent me to a super low custody work camp. So my experience wasn't horrible the first time around. Obviously it was prison, and prison wasn't a great place, but I kind of stuck to myself. I didn't get up in the subculture of prison. And that time kind of went by pretty quickly, and it sucked. Obviously it sucked being away from family, the conditions of prison, the food, everything, going from the life that I had lived before to being in this environment, and it was just completely different. But the second time I went to prison is what ultimately ended up being like the worst experience for my life. So when I went to prison that first time, I came home, started doing really well. I worked at a treatment center. I ended up getting married, got somebody pregnant, and we had issues, and I ended up relapsing, and I went back to prison. So I got charged with a burglary at my parents' house the second time I went to prison, and my parents just tried to call the cops to get me help, and the state ended up, picking up charges. My parents even tried to drop the charges. So the state offered me 15 years. My parents went to the state to sign paperwork to drop the charges. The state told my parents, "You're not the victim. You're our star witness. He didn't commit a crime against you. He committed a crime against the state of Florida." I ended up pleading out to 7 years in prison, followed by 5 years probation. So now this is 2 times that I went to prison. So the first time was like, not so bad in my mind. I got through it. It was obviously hard, but there was no rehabilitation.
Right.
It was just a timeout from society. I lucked up and went to a super laid back spot that was a work camp, and it was, low custody. I didn't really have any issues. Second time, I got caught up in the subculture of prison. I was actively using. I was ended up joining a gang, and it just completely changed my life. Like, I went in with no tattoos, came out covered in tattoos, joined a gang, a white supremacist organization of all things. And, it was at the height of the whole, Trump Black Lives Matters movement. And, I started getting this thing in my head that, white males were being discriminated against in America, and you can't be a white Christian conservative. And so I got deeply into the politics of prison and all that. And it was just, my second time was a horrible experience. And being caught up in gang politics, being caught up in the prison world. And, obviously it's very tribal. There was a lot of, racism. There was a lot of people not getting, and I got along with a lot of people, but I also, I was easy to get along with, and people kind of gravitated towards my story a little bit that, I played professional baseball and I played sports in prison. But I also started to get deeply influenced by politics, right? And became very racist, like stuff that was already living inside of me started to come out at the height of that, the whole Trump Black Lives Matters movement in 2016. So I think that experience in prison was
Well, I think it's interesting how, going into, like you said it really well, it's a primitive environment, it's tribal, and you have, one of the things I always thought about when I was in was that, I was desperately afraid of losing myself, losing who I was. And I tried, to have a prison job that, I worked at the food. I just tried to do things that kept me feeling like me, because it's so easy to fall into the institutionalized feel of, I don't have any control, or the things I have control with, I'm doing because I'm in this prison. And it's a weird environment. It's a real mind play, I think, to create almost mind hacks to try to keep yourself being you. And, I always wonder, because I had a 5-year sentence. I always wonder, like somebody that has 20 years, how do you keep yourself sane enough to where you aren't totally institutionalized? The movie Shawshank is so deep because it has so many meanings to it and layers to it. But I think about that one line that I think Red says. He said, when you first come in here, that you look at these walls and they're to keep you in. And then as longer you're here, the walls that put their arms around you and give you comfort. And that's kind of like the institutionalized feel of being inside prison.
Yeah. And that's what I became institutionalized. It was the second time I realized, okay, I'm in this for a while. And this is my life. This environment, I already did time. So I wasn't, as green as I was the first time around. I knew what to expect. I knew it does. It starts to, you people become institutionalized because it's a different code for living in there. And it's street rules, you know, and I tell people all the time, it's like if somebody comes and takes something out of your locker, you're not going to knock on the window, tell the officer, hey, this guy took this out of my locker. No, you got to like
deal with it.
You got to fight. You got to like, otherwise you become prey, because in there it's either predator or prey. Yep. You know, there's really not any in between. So like, whereas in society, you're taught that if somebody comes and takes something from you and you're not doing it while you're there, like steals something from you while you're not at your house, that you call the cops, and, you know, and you go through the proper channels of law enforcement. Yeah. So like, it's just the whole code of living for prison is completely different. And I became institutionalized. I became caught up in that world. And,
so over time. And knowing that, Danny, when you were getting close to the door of getting out, what thoughts were going through your mind on how you were getting back in?
I was not preparing myself at all. Like, I was a mess all the way to the time I left prison. Like, prison did nothing to rehabilitate me at all. Like, I came out, the only thing that lucked up is I ended up going to confinement, like with almost like 30 days left. But I was at a work camp. I was trying to go over to the main unit to get drugs, basically, to bring back, because I was still actively up in that lifestyle. And I ended up getting caught being in an unauthorized area, and they put me in confinement. And within the last, 30 plus days, I ended up having time to like kind of dry out and clean up. And when I came home, like I white knuckled it for a while, to where I was able to, I always do well enough where I can stay clean 6, 7, 8 months on my own. But then I'd go right back to that vicious cycle. And that's kind of what happened, even this last time when I came home. I did really well at first, and then I started to have problems and I relapsed, bam, and almost real close to getting in trouble again. But this time they put me in mental health court. And mental health court absolutely changed my life. Like, it gave me access to therapy. I was able to deal with all the childhood trauma from, what it was like growing up with my parents and not knowing my mom. I was able to deal with, obviously, my whole identity was in professional baseball. I didn't know what to do with my life after that. Like, who am I as a person? And I really got the chance to start to learn like who I am. I also got to see a psychiatrist. They put me on medication to kind of stabilize me, but learning how to process emotions and articulate how I'm feeling. And this is all through the courts.
Well, see, I didn't, Danny, is that, I'm thinking that's obviously that's not a federal thing. So that's a state thing within Florida.
So I'd been in and out of jail my entire life, and never once did the system offer me help. 20 plus years, they either slapped me on my wrist and sent me home, or they sent me to prison. There was never any, rehabilitation. Finally, and the only reason I was able to get rehabilitation this time is because my wife, who I'm separated from right now, paid $23,000 for a lawyer. And that lawyer was able to get me into mental health court. And mental health court changed my life. So mental health court, what they have here is that you get assigned a case manager. You got to see a psychiatrist. They'll put you on any medication if you need it. They diagnose you. Then you also have to see a therapist. You have to show up in court, at first, like once a month. You have to take drug tests. I took drug tests 3 times a week. But it gave me resources and access to a team of people. I had 2 peer specialists, a case manager, a psychiatrist, and a therapist. And I started to get better. Like, miraculously, like, I had access to I started to treat the trauma that I had from a child that I never knew how to process. I didn't know how to articulate what I was feeling. I knew what I was feeling. I knew I didn't feel right, but I couldn't describe it. I couldn't talk about it because I grew up in a household where we didn't talk about
you didn't talk about anything.
Yeah,
we didn't even talk about the fact that you don't have a mom, that she's probably somewhere in the neighborhood, and a sister. Yeah. You don't talk about that either.
And she ended up passing before I went to prison the second time.
Wow.
And my wife at the time, she ended up giving me the courage to call her. She was like, you need to give her a call. You need to get some closure. And I called her. And when I asked her like why she left, she said that, she already had a daughter from a different relationship, and she couldn't afford like the child support, and it was just a lot for her as a mother. And I was so mad at her. Like, I was like, that's a poor excuse. You know, that's a cop out. She ended up signing her rights over. And she wanted me to come see her. And I was just so mad that I was like, you know, maybe when I get out of prison, I'll come see you. And when I was in prison, I ended up calling home, and I got the news that she was in hospice. So the lieutenant on the compound let me go call her, and I was able to call her. I forgave her, you know, and within hours she ended up passing. So, you know, but I struggled with that, and I finally got some closure with it, because I learned how to deal with it. And I realized that, you know, it wasn't my fault that, you know, I felt, you know, rejected, and there was a lot of abandonment issues. And, you know, it obviously affected my other relationships in life, and keeping people at arm's length and not trusting them and waiting for the, you know, the other, you know, foot to drop. But the other thing too, like even now, like I'm going through my own child custody thing, and I realized that how hard it is and how much money it costs. You know, it's cost me so much money to try to fight to see my son. And now I think about my mom, because before I always blamed her. Like, my dad was my hero. Like, he manned up, he raised me. Like, you know, there's always two sides to a story.
How old is your son now, Danny?
He's 9.
9.
And he was born right before I went. So he was born in September of 2014. I was arrested December of 2014. I got out in 2021, and tried calling. You know, my son was allowed to see my parents the entire time I was incarcerated, so about a month before I came home, and then she just stopped. And her reasoning for not allowing me to see him and trying to keep him out of my life is that she just flat out says that I'm going to relapse and go back to prison. You know, like her fear is that why introduce him to me when I'm just going to do what I always do.
She doesn't trust your situation, right?
Yeah. And I understand the skepticism, but like, how long do you punish somebody?
Right. Can't be lifetime.
Yeah. Okay. Are they doing the work? You know, give them an opportunity. Because, you know, as a convicted felon, like if you're not working for yourself or creating your own little hustle, like job opportunities aren't out there. Like
really
if
tough.
You got that convicted felon label, and then
it's a lifetime label.
A lifetime label.
Yeah.
Yep. You can be denied housing. You can be denied jobs. You can be denied education. And I came home. I wanted to work badly. I tried to work, like apply at like Home Depot and Target. Places denied me because they said it was too recent.
Yep.
If it wasn't for my boss here, you know, with the shipping containers offering me a job, like I don't know what I would have done.
Well, I love the story about that too, because he really identified with you, Danny, and said, "Hey, this could have been me. I could have, but you know what? I chose to go this direction, and you took the fork in the road and went the other direction." So cool, because you're with somebody that you have a lot of talents, and he's using your talents that other people are checking off as not needed because of your being an ex-felon, and you're given an opportunity here. Exactly how did that happen? You know, I know what he said but how did you find it? How did you find the opportunity?
So in my community, my case manager from mental health court got me to go to a place called Project Lift, which is a nonprofit. They teach trades to people coming out of incarceration and to at-risk youth. And I was like, okay, well, people coming out of prison, if you got a felony, you're like basically relegated to blue collar jobs. Like that's all the jobs you're going to be able to get. Go work in a construction site or do something.
Right.
And that's not really where my skill set was. Like I wasn't raised to work with my hands and do manual labor. You know, like I always did, you know, marketing or sales or, you know, other jobs and stuff. So like, I was like, finally, I'll give them a chance, because my experience with a lot of these nonprofits and stuff like that, especially if there are any government funding, is that it's superficial. Like they get the government funding, but they don't really do anything to help you.
Yep.
And so I was real skeptical at first. And then finally I was like, you know what, I'll give it a shot. And it was legit. Like they were paying me $15 an hour to teach me a trade. And I was like, okay, like, cool. So then they had a Christmas party for like donors, and they asked me if I would work it, and I was like, sure. So I ended up working, you know, picking up trash behind wealthy people, and basically, like if they'd leave their cup down, I'd go throw it in the trash for them and stuff like that. And I was passing out T-shirts, and the owner of this company was there, and he asked the director of operations, he goes, I need some employees. Give me your best guy, one person. And the guy pointed to me and said, called me over there, introduced me to him. And he was like, hey, can you be to work tomorrow at, 7 a.m. or Monday at 7 a.m.? And I was like, absolutely. I showed up. I started working in the back, making these, helping to build. I didn't really have a skill set, but I was willing to work and learn and do whatever. I'm a fast learner. I was just like, you got to show me. And even then, I'm still not like great with my hands.
I'm not either, Danny.
I could tell you how to do it, but when I'm physically trying to do it myself,
I get it.
Yeah. But I did that for about a month or two, and then he saw my ability to connect with people and network and my social media presence and stuff like that. And he said, you know what, your skills could be best used somewhere else. And so he gave me opportunity to start working in sales. And then now I became the director of sales and, with business development. And we're looking to build communities of container homes. And there's so many different applications, obviously, like a starter home for young people, come right out of college, or even, blue collar worker, whatever. There's also the application of helping the unhoused, people who are experiencing homelessness. And we're working with a nonprofit right now. That's what they want to do. Another nonprofit wants to provide veteran housing. Mm-hmm. So I appreciated it because I know what it's like to be homeless.
Yep.
I know what it's like to come out of incarceration and be justice impacted and not have access to resources like housing. And
it's perfect, Danny. I mean, I just love this whole thing that you're doing, because everything that you are about, down to your soul, is encapsulated into what you can do with this. And it's so needed. It's so needed. Yeah. What you just listed off is all the different places and people that need this. And on top of it, it's a nice living environment. So, it makes a lot of sense. And
that's what I say. Even 95% of people coming out of 95% of people in prison will come out one day, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to return back to the same community that they once were in,
right?
Sometimes victimizing other people. And it's like, what do you want these people to be when they come out? Better neighbors, or better criminals. Good neighbors are better criminals. And if we don't give people coming from incarceration access to resources and the ability to change their lives, then we're only creating a less safe society. We're actually, by default, saying de facto we're pro-crime. So
and it sounds like to me, you have lived through those layers, because you would have probably, Danny, have been back in, except for the fact that you went through the mental health court, were able to get all those resources. And now you have something to grab onto. You've got some side things to grab onto, so you're not just falling down a hole that keeps getting bigger.
A strong foundation.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Mental health court 100% saved my life. And that's when you put rehabilitation as the norm and punishment, or prison as the alternative. That should always be the alternative. And I think that if we look at mental health and substance abuse, if we look at our criminal justice system, just look at that as a public health crisis and not a morality issue.
Yeah.
Because I think in America, we treat crime, but we don't treat people. And we look at it from a morality issue. We think it's bad people who need to become good rather than sick people who need to become well.
Yes.
And there's good people that make bad decisions in active addiction, that make bad decisions,
Absolutely.
in moments of not thinking clearly. So that really, because it gave me the tools and the access. I had a lot of childhood trauma, and some people deal with trauma on their own and they're able to cope and they live great lives and they never commit a crime and they never get addicted. And, I have so much love for those people and so much respect and admiration, because I wish I would have been that person, but I wasn't. And, for the longest time, I carried so much shame and guilt thinking I was a bad person. And that's why I wanted to end my life. It's because I thought I was a bad person. And when society's telling you you're a bad person, because I made a lot of bad decisions. I hurt a lot of people and I have a lot of regrets for that. The emotional pain I caused my family and people around me, but I was a sick person. And once I started to look at my life from that perspective, that you're not a bad person. You weren't a bad kid. I don't think there's anything as such thing as bad kids. There might be some troubled kids, or kids that need more attention and love. But,
and I think the other thing, Danny, that I think is interesting from a lot of different angles is, you're really popular on TikTok. And I think it's your vulnerability and the rawness of, you don't have to, there's a lot of people out there saying things and not living it, or believing they're saying it, but not believing it. Or it's a facade. I think one of the things that I like about that platform is there's a lot of people that are ex-felons on that platform. And, Sabrina Morgan's another one that's really popular on there. And it's because she's really open.
Yes,
and I think that's why people are drawn to your posts and what you're doing and what you're saying. And I think it can help a lot of people. That's the thing. A lot of people say these platforms are bad, which I think there's some things that, kids have a really tough time with the social media and the bullying and everything, but there are some really good things that can come from it too. Like the things that you do with your post and Sabrina, and those actually are helping people grab onto something because they feel like they have nowhere to turn. So, thank God you're doing that, because, I so respect the fact that when you have what we have, you have two ways to go with it. You can hide and hope that nobody finds out who you are, which I don't think you can do at this day and age. There's too many ways to Google and find you.
Right.
But the other thing is to lead with it and try to help people so that they can find a different path. And that's what you're doing through what you're doing with your work, what you're doing with your social media. And that's why I was really excited to talk to you, because I think, hopefully we can get more Danny Collins out there that spread the word that you don't have to live a life that you don't want to live. You can actually improve it.
Yeah. And hopefully thank you. I appreciate that. And hopefully we get more people that destigmatize, people that have been incarcerated, justice impacted, or people that, suffer from mental health and substance abuse, and that we can start doing some more preventative stuff to stop people going down that road. Like ultimately I would love to do that as well, as like admonish our youth to not, because choices have consequences, man. And
they can change your life, it can change your life, and you can still pull yourself out of the ditch, but it would be preferable not to go in the ditch.
Yeah. Preferable not to go in the ditch. Absolutely.
Or for your case, going into a lake of water and swimming out. What a metaphor.
I think that's the other thing too, is I minimize the impact that my story could have, or like how crazy it really was.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people tell me like, you should write a book, or your story is like a movie. And I think I minimize it a lot. Like, oh, it's not that.
Well, it's because, why? It's because you've lived it, Danny. I was talking to a group of college kids the other day, and once I got talking about it, I realized how weird it was what I just said, that I was a 15-year-old kid that went to visit my dad in prison. And then I got out of prison at 50 years old, and I went back to visit my dad in the same visiting room in that same prison. And he had been in twice, but then they were like, God, you're really messed up. And I said, well, I didn't know I was messed up, and maybe that sounds really messed up. that's maybe not normal.
So normal for us, right? Yeah. Become desensitized. Right. And I think that even the second time I went to prison, I was desensitized to prison. Because
you were already there. It didn't scare you the way that it scares you when you walk in the first time.
Yeah.
Danny, I've loved this conversation. I always ask people, at the end of our interview, all the things that you just said about the fact that it probably should be, I think it should be a book, and what you've lived on your journey. What do you think's your biggest takeaway through all that you've been to up till now?
I mean, for me, the biggest thing is finding out who I am, as a person, being true to who I am. Like I said, my identity was always in baseball or the things that I did, and not, just learning more about myself and taking that time to understand, me and consciously like getting to know myself. So
that's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think a lot of times that I sought validation through everybody else, whether it was through baseball or whether it was through a relationship or doing well in school, and never really being comfortable. And like you said, trying to hide, You know, like now I'm an open book, you know, and I make myself as vulnerable as I possibly can. You know, I think there's this misconception that, you know, of what an alpha male or a beta male, you hear that stuff, people say that stuff all the time, but like, I think people that, you know, men that are able to open up, make themselves vulnerable and talk about their emotions and feelings and just be real.
It's healthy.
It helps. It makes a difference, because I think I was always taught that, you know, men don't do that. Men don't talk about feelings. Men don't process, you know, like emotions, and you don't share your weaknesses and vulnerabilities, because especially if you think about prison, is that you can't do that in there. You know, like you will open yourself up for becoming a victim and being victimized, you know, and we live in a society that kind of teaches you that. So like, I would say that's the biggest thing.
No, I think that's huge. I mean, it's a great takeaway too. You know, you got to find yourself. Otherwise you have this imposter syndrome that you're doing things that you probably shouldn't be doing to cover up things that you haven't dealt with. And if you can find out who you are and where you fit in life, then you get a lot more healthy and comfortable with yourself. Danny, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, I know TikTok, you go to Danny Collins and you can get there. And actually, Containing Luxury, is that what really get the name?
Yep, right? ContainingLuxury.com. TikTok is Danny F. Collins, and Instagram's both.
Instagram too, right? Exactly.
Yeah. And then Containing Luxury on all platforms as well.
Yeah. And check them out. It's really, it's a cool thing. And I hope it goes. So, I mean, I can see these things being communities and really solving a lot of problems for a lot of different people. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, go to BrentCassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY. We spell it wrong. And for anybody who wants to buy the book, go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Nightmare Success. I'm loving you guys giving me these reviews. You're putting the show on steroids, and it's so appreciative, because I love doing this, and it's helping break down the narrative that all people need to go back. There's some people out here making their second chances work, like Danny Collins right here. I think his story is going to help a lot of people who listen to this today. As I used to say to my people when I was typing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Danny Collins, thanks so much today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Nightmare Success, in and out.